So we'll open with a chant. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. May we be protected together. May we be nourished together. May we acquire strength together. May our learning shine forth in our lives. May we not find fault with one another. Om, peace, peace, peace. So we begin our study as always with a prayer for that our study may actually manifest in our lives, that it may not just be some intellectual exercise, but that it will actually help us in our spiritual life, in every part of our life. So we are studying Karma Yoga, the classes of Swami Vivekananda. And we have, so far in this series of classes, we have covered the first 4 classes for beginners. Now, Swamiji had an interesting pattern of giving these classes. This was in 1895 December through January 1896, 8 classes in total, and they began on December the 13th, 1895. And in the morning, he gave the class for advanced students, and in the evening, he gave the class for beginners students. Why he gave it this way, we don't know, but the way we have taken it is we've taken the first 4 classes for beginners, and now we're starting the first class for advanced students. So this is actually the very first class in the series, because it was given on the morning of December 13 in New York City. And we know that at 228 West 39th Street, not the most salubrious part of the city, but the people came. And in the brownstone building, the 2 rooms would be opened together, and 75, 100, maybe on this first class, 75 people would have been there. By the time it was going on further, maybe 100, 150 people even, 125 people, crammed into those rooms, hanging on to every word of Swami Vivekananda. Now, on Friday, December 13, 1895, I just looked it up, the high temperature for the day was 24 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was a cold day, and the low temperature was 13. So it was quite chilly in New York, but of course they had already the steam heat, and all the rooms were heated nicely. So Swamiji's nose and ears did not fall off, as he joked that he was afraid might happen. And another interesting, why in the actual book Karma Yoga, the classes are arranged not quite, they're arranged in chronological order, but it's interesting. It starts with the first class for beginners, then the first class for advanced, then the second class for advanced, then the second class for beginners, then the third class for beginners, then the third class for advanced, then the fourth class for advanced, then the fourth class for beginners. This is the way the classes are arranged in complete works. We are taking it slightly differently. We're taking it, as I mentioned, first all the 4 beginners classes, because after all, we are beginners. But now that we've passed through that, we can think, all right, maybe we can handle the advanced classes now. We're going to start back up to Friday, December 13, 1895, and the first class for advanced students. Now, there was a person in the room who was very important for our purposes, and his name was Hosea J. Goodwin. And he had just been engaged by the Vedanta Society to take Swamiji's lectures and classes down in shorthand. That's why we have such a careful record of what he said in these classes. And the transcripts, Goodwin would be up all night typing out the transcript from the shorthand notes, and these were then put into the book Karma Yoga, edited by Ellen Waldo. However, And it's amazing how quickly that came out. In February of 1896, the New York edition of Karma Yoga came out. So they worked very hard. There was a lot of activity. And however, the transcripts were also sent to Edward Sturdy in England for his study, and because he also had a Vedanta group there, so for his study and knowledge. And he went ahead and published them. And this angered the New York Vedanta Society people very much, because they had the publication rights, and how dare he publish these that were just for his study, not for publication. And we can be extremely grateful to him because he published the transcripts basically unedited. So we're reading from those unedited, his publication, also published in 1896, must have been towards the end of January because he beat the New York publication, and almost unedited. So let's begin. Swamiji begins his first class for advanced students. According to the Sankhya philosophy, nature is composed of three forces, called in Sanskrit sattva, rajas, and tamas. All right, so he's going to start with the gunas. I think those of us who have been studying Vedanta for a little while are familiar with the gunas. Sattva, rajas, and tamas. What are their characteristics? Pop quiz. Sattva, tamas. Inertia. Lethargy. Lethargy, inertia, darkness. Rajas? Activity. Passion. Anger. Sattva? Calmness. Equilibrium. He said when tamas and rajas are perfectly at balance, we get sattva. Tamas is that darkness, that lethargy. That he's going to go into it. Let's read what he says. But this is an interesting passage here because he gives a little bit of a different interpretation. He hints at a slightly different interpretation of the gunas, which I haven't seen anywhere else, and which is edited out of the New York edition. He says, these manifested in the physical world are what we call attraction, repulsion, and control of the two. Sattva is the control, rajas is the repulsion, while tamas is the attraction. We have not seen this, the gunas described in this way in other places, so it calls for some thought, some reflection on what he means exactly. I'm not quite sure what he means exactly, but and he doesn't go into it much, but it seems that perhaps he is trying to tie the gunas in with modern science, or the science of those days, of particles which attract each other and repel each other, and those kind of things. Tamas is typified as darkness or inactivity, rajas as activity, where each particle is trying to fly off from the attracting center. And sattva is the equilibrium of the two, getting a balance of both. So maybe here he's suggesting that there is some center which is attracting everything, and that's a center of complete and perfect inertia. And tamas represents getting attracted to that point, and rajas represents getting thrown off from that point, and sattva is the balance of the two. Perhaps that's what he's trying to suggest. Anyhow, he doesn't go into it further as this attraction and repulsion equilibrium, but it's interesting that in this this first part of the class, he gives this unusual interpretation of the gunas. So let's keep that in mind as we read further and see if it makes sense to us. Now, each person is composed of these three forces. In each of us, we find that sometimes the tamas prevails. We become lazy. We cannot move. We are inactive, bound down, weighed down by certain ideas. At other times, activity will prevail. We will try to fly off from the center. And then, at other times, that calm balancing of both will prevail, the sattva. I find it helpful to understand, if we look at our own minds, we can see these different tendencies. Sometimes it's really hard to wake up in the morning. Sometimes all we want to do is go back to bed, right? we all have those days when we wish we could just go back to bed. And if it's a holiday, sometimes we do, isn't it? I'm going back to bed, forget it. Tamas, perfect example. Tamas. Sometimes everything just seems dark. We don't see any light. Everything is depressing. We're sad. We're down. Tamas. Some days, perhaps everything, we feel restless. We have to do something. And perhaps we get so restless that we can't think of clearly because the mind is racing. Or everything irritates us. We get angry at every little thing. We have those days too, where every little thing bugs us, and everything is wrong, and like we drank too much coffee. And in that mood, we probably drink more coffee. Okay, Rajas, perfect example. Rajas. Sattva, some days we have that feeling of perfect peace. Maybe we've gone on a beautiful hike with all alone, or maybe with just a good friend or with a family member, and we come to a mountain top and everything is quiet and the birds are chirping and we feel peace. We can think clearly, we can feel that, yes, this is our true nature is to be here. This is really where we are at our best, in this state of calm and peace, sattva. And of course, we know from Bhagavad Gita, it's in a progression. When we're feeling really lazy and all we want to do is everything is dark, what's the remedy? Well, sometimes it is that we just have to sleep a little more. But Bhagavad Gita says, Sri Krishna says, the remedy for tamas is rajas. We have to apply some rajas, apply some activity, drink some coffee. And the remedy for rajas is sattva. Right? So we move from tamas to rajas to sattva. Do you remember the story of the three robbers? Sri Ramakrishna's story of the three robbers? Okay, some of you remember it, and some of you are looking blankly. There was a businessman who was going home to his village after doing his business in the city, and he was passing through the forest, and three robbers assailed him, and they robbed him of everything. And then one robber said, the first robber said, "What's the use of keeping him alive? Let's kill him." And so drew his sword to just put an end to the man's life. And the second robber said, "Well, no, there's no need to kill him. We'll just tie him here to this tree." And so they tied him up to the tree so he couldn't escape, and then they went on their way. After some time, the third robber comes back. What does he do? "Oh, I'm sorry, you must be hurt." Untied the ropes and brought him to the road and said, "Here, if you follow the road here, you'll come to your village." And the man is grateful. He says, "Oh, thank you for rescuing me. You must come to my home, and we'll welcome you in my home." And the robber said, "No, I cannot come with you. The police will catch me. I cannot come with you to your home." So like that, Sri Ramakrishna would say the three gunas are like these three robbers. The first robber is tamas. Tamas kills. Tamas destroys. The second robber is rajas. Rajas binds us to the world. Binds us to the world. The third robber is sattva. Shows us the way home. Unties our bonds and brings us home. But the third robber also can't come home with us. The third robber is still a robber. The Brahman, our true home in the divine, is beyond the gunas, beyond all three of these, both tamas, rajas, and sattva. But for our life, it's helpful. It's helpful to sometimes, I think, it's a helpful model to interpret our daily life when we see we have certain experiences, and we can understand. Yes, this is a manifestation of rajas. Then we try to bring a little sattva to the matter, or we can say this is a manifestation of tamas here. I need to bring a little rajas to the matter, or just get the heck out of here. So this is to me what the value is of of this understanding. It's one model of looking at the universe and understanding it. And from that model, from the Sankhya model, everything is a combination of these three gunas. In greater and lesser degrees, the different gunas will be manifesting. So he says, each person is composed of these three forces. In each of us we find that sometimes the tamas prevails. We become lazy. We cannot move. We are inactive, bound down, weighed down by certain ideas. At other times, activity will prevail. We will try to fly off from the center. And then at other times, that calm balancing of both will prevail, the sattva. Again, we already read that. Again, in different people, one of these forces is generally predominant. We all know people who are so restless they can't sit still. And we know other people who are just, they can't wake up, right? And then there are people who are really calm and peaceful. So the characteristic of one person is that of inactivity, dullness, and laziness. The characteristic of another person is activity, power, manifestation of energy. And in another person, we find the sweetness, calmness, gentleness, which are balancing both, balancing both. So in all creation, in animals, plants, and human beings, we find the typification of all these different forces. So why are we bringing all this up in Karma Yoga? What does this have to do with Karma Yoga? Well, Swamiji is going to tell us about it. Karma Yoga has specially to deal with these three elements. By teaching us what they are and how to employ them, it helps us to do our work better. Okay, fair enough. It seems straightforward. It is an organism in which there are different grades and states. Oh, sorry. Human society is a graded organization. It is an organism. Interesting, as society as an organism, as a living something, in which there are different grades and states. And of course, in our work, when we are having to work, we are working in society. We're working with other people. And let's back up for a moment and remind ourselves, what is Karma Yoga? It is learning the secret of work. It is turning our work into a path to freedom. It's turning our work into spiritual practice. Because the goal of all yoga is mukti, freedom, or God realization, or realizing who we are as infinite consciousness and bliss. So if that is the purpose of our work, if we work with that purpose in mind, then our work becomes yoga. And that's the idea of Karma Yoga. So as we work, and the more we can understand how to work, the more our work can be turned into yoga. We all know about morality, and we all know about duty. And we find at the same time that in different countries, morality varies greatly. What is regarded as moral in one country, in another may be perfectly immoral. For instance, in one, cousins can marry. In another, it is thought to be very immoral. In one, men can marry their sisters-in-law. In another, it is regarded as immoral. In one, people can marry only once. In another, many times, and so forth. So in all other departments of morality, we find the standard varies greatly. Yet, we have the idea that there must be a universal standard of morality. Interesting point. Customs vary tremendously in different cultures, and the more different the culture, the more the customs are different. And say why that always comes to my mind is that when in Rome, do as the Romans do, it makes things a lot easier. And there's a good example is, for me, a kind of funny experience. In India, the idea of queuing up, of standing in a line waiting for something, is very different from the idea in America. And even among our brahmacharis, we were in the seminary, it's called the training center, and after the class is over, we all stand up and we head for the door. But naturally, we line up in the aisles, and I always found that the brother behind me would put his hand on my back and sort of push me a little bit. And it used to irritate me a lot, like, we're all here, that it's not going to make us get out of this room any faster with you trying to push me out. Why do you have your hand on my back? What's the need? We're all heading towards the door. What's the thing? Finally, what I did, I put my hand on the back of the brother in front of me. And then it was fine. Then I had no problem. Then I realized this is just the way you leave a room in India. You put your hand on the back of the person in front of you, and then you leave. Fine, no problem. It just requires a shift in outlook. And when in India, do as the Indians do. And then it was fine. It was beautiful. So that was my lesson in, and now it is not exactly wrong, but in America it would be considered a little odd, a little bit almost wrong to put your hand on someone's back. But in India it's the right thing to do. It's actually right. And once I did it, I was observing the moral code of leaving a room. And everything was beautiful. Everything was fine. So that was my experience. I'm sure you have had your own experiences. And some of you have come from India and had your experiences here in America, huh? What's that, Ted?
You're shoving a little bit?
No, just a gentle push. There's no shoving. It's no shoving. It's just a gentle pressure. That's the way it works. So, and yet, so on the one hand, we think there must be a universal standard, and the different scriptures try to present these things. In Western culture, the Christian and Christianity, Judaism, the 10 Commandments, so-called, do not kill, do not do this, do not do that. These are the absolutes. But then we find perhaps they're not always absolutes. So it is with duty. The idea of duty varies much among different nations. In one country, if a person does not do certain things, people will say he has acted wrongly. And if he does those very things in another country, people will still say that he or she did not act rightly. And yet, we know that there must be some universal idea of duty. In the same way, one class of society thinks that certain things are its duty, and another class thinks quite the opposite and would be horrified if it had to do those things. Two ways are left open to us. This is quite straightforward. This is relative. Well, we have this understanding that morality, to a great extent, though not absolutely, not in every case, but to a great extent, it is relative. And duties, what is a duty of a person? It depends on where you are in life. What is your calling in life? It's the duty of the soldier to defend the country and perhaps even to shoot the enemies. But that's not the duty of the shopkeeper or the undertaker or whatever it may be. Two ways are left open to us. Either the way of the ignorant, who think that there is only one way to truth and that all the rest are wrong, or the way of the wise, who admit that according to the mental constitution or the different planes of existence in which we are, duties and morality may vary. Swamiji comes back again and again to this idea of fanaticism and how harmful it is, and how it's really the kindergarten of religion, that when we first take up, it comes also in spiritual life. We first take up spiritual life, and many people tend to become a little fanatic. My way, this is true, it must be true for everybody. And anyone who doesn't follow these ideas, anyone who doesn't practice pure vegetarianism, worthless. Or whatever the question may be, vegetarianism or bathing 3 times a day, or accepting Krishna as the ideal, or Jesus as the ideal, or Allah as the ideal, you forget it. You're going to hell. Only the Krishna people have a little bit of compassion. They don't say you're going to hell. They say you have to come back again, which is almost as bad. But So that's the fanaticism. That's the ignorant way, that there must be an absolute standard, and anyone who doesn't meet up with it, cut off their head. Or the wise way, which obviously Swamiji is trying to lead us also to this wisdom, that according to mental constitution or different planes of existence, or our duties and morality may vary. So the important thing is to know that there are gradations of duty and of morality, that what is the duty of one state of life in one set of circumstances will not be that of another. And I think where he's going with this is, of course, he introduced the idea of the gunas first, and even according as one guna or another may be predominant in us, our duties will vary. The work that we should be doing, what is our calling in life, that will vary. And he'll take it finally to, at the end of this class, he is going to compare the duties of the monk with the duties of the householder. And that's where the title of this class comes, which I forgot to mention. The title given to this class, though maybe not by Swamiji, maybe by his editors, is "Each is great in his or her own place." We are great in our own place. And that brings in so many ideas. The idea of swadharma in the Gita, that Arjuna is, his duty, his calling is to be a soldier. And to do that work unattached is what he is called to do. And he gets confused and he thinks he should become a monk. And Sri Krishna scolds him. He's going to bring up this example. And so according the karma yoga in its earlier phases, we are to do our duty. We do our duty perfectly, do it as an offering. In the later stages, we'll see that Swamiji even says that duty is a terrible bondage and we have to go beyond duty. But at the beginning, our duty, if we are a mother, what is our duty? To look after the children. If we're a doctor, what is our duty? To treat the patients as best we can, to bring them to health. If we are a ditch digger, what is our duty? Well, to dig the ditches, but to dig them well and and perfectly, and dig the ditches as an offering. The following example will serve to illustrate. All great teachers have taught, resist not evil. That non-resisting evil is the highest ideal. We all know that if every one of us living in this country were not to resist evil, we should be nowhere. The whole social fabric would fall to pieces. Society would be destroyed. Rogues and blackguards would have possession of our properties and our lives and would do whatever they liked with us. Even if only one day of non-resistance were practiced, it would lead to the utter dissolution of society. So, how do you figure this out? Yet, intuitively, in our heart of hearts, we feel the truth of the teaching, resist not evil. This seems to us to be the highest ideal. Yet, to teach this doctrine only would be equivalent to condemning a vast proportion of humankind. Well, it's an interesting question. This idea of resist not evil. Because ahimsa seems to be resist not evil, but it's not exactly resist not evil. It is commit no harm. Be not evil, but commit no harm. And even in the face of evil, commit no harm. That's ahimsa. But it doesn't quite say resist not evil. Swami Vivekananda would say that this ideal of non-resistance is the highest ideal for the illumined saint. An interesting example in Sri Ramakrishna's life. You know, he was had his first supplier of needs, so-called, was Mathurnath Bishwas, Mathur Babu. And Mathu Babu had had certain insights into who Sri Ramakrishna was and was utterly devoted to him. Though he was a worldly man at the same time, he was a very wealthy man by virtue of being married to Rani Rashmani's daughter. And he was a very powerful man, a lot of wealth. He had his own gunas. He had his, how would you translate gundas? That's like Indian English, isn't it? Thugs, his own sort of team of thugs to enforce the discipline and whatever. He had his, but he was at the same time a spiritual man and extremely devoted to Sri Ramakrishna, looking upon him as his own father. And one of the priests engaged in performing the daily services at Mathur's home became extremely jealous of Sri Ramakrishna, because he felt that Sri Ramakrishna had somehow controlled Mathur with some kind of mantra or some kind of charm. And so Mathur Babu was under Sri Ramakrishna's control. He was under his control, but how? Simply by being himself. Mathur Babu recognized Sri Ramakrishna as a spiritual giant, as some kind of, he didn't know what, as a god, as something much greater, and he had this tremendous devotion for him, and also had Sri Ramakrishna's protection. So this priest wanted to know the secret. How have you got Mathu under your control? Give me the secret so I can also, because this priest was apparently greedy. He wanted some money. And Sri Ramakrishna, he didn't have any. He said, I don't know, I don't have anything, I didn't do anything. And he didn't believe him. So one day, Sri Ramakrishna was at Mathur's Calcutta home, and he went into ecstasy. And he couldn't speak, and the priest was insisting, you must tell me. And he wouldn't speak, he couldn't speak, he was in ecstasy, in divine ecstasy. And this priest kicked Sri Ramakrishna, who was lying on the ground, with boots. He was wearing boots, and he kicked him several times, leaving black marks on his body, black bruises. So Sri Ramakrishna was in ecstasy. He couldn't resist. This was certainly a case of evil being done to him, some kind of violence being done to him. But he never reported the incident. Later, that priest was dismissed for some other reason. And much later, Mathur Babu came to know of it and said, why didn't you tell me, Father? I would have cut off his head, and quite possibly he would have done so. So Sri Ramakrishna protected this priest by not saying anything. So this is an example of ahimsa. When violence is being done to him, he's being attacked, and he didn't defend himself, neither at the time nor later. However, if take the example of Holy Mother, Sri Ma Sarada Devi, who was also on an equivalent spiritual stature, on an equivalent spiritual plane as Sri Ramakrishna. She was at her dwelling at Udbodhan, I believe, in Calcutta, and she was generally so reticent to speak, so quiet to speak to strangers, that she wouldn't speak. If there were men present, she would have Golap Ma next to her, and the man would speak, and she would give the answer to Golap Ma or Yogan Ma, who would speak it loud enough for the man to hear. So shy, so modest was she, always wearing her veil in Calcutta. Now, outside there was living kind of in little shacks and tents were families of laborers. And at a certain point, one of these laborers started beating his wife. He got into a argument and started beating his wife, and it was horrible to hear. And after a few moments of this, Holy Mother went to the window and shouted, "Now I suppose something like, 'Now I suppose you're going to kill her outright,' in a loud voice." And everybody got stunned and startled. And the man also stopped his beating and gradually reconciled, within a few minutes, reconciled with his wife. And so here, there was some evil being done, and Mother resisted it. She intervened. Now, it was not something being done to her, it was being done to someone else. So there's also a little difference. in the practice of ahimsa. Though, of course, she didn't actually harm anyone, but she intervened. She resisted without harming. So these are some of the thoughts that occur to my mind in relation to this idea of non-resistance. Not only so, if this ideal of resist not evil, of non-resistance, were preached to everyone, it would be making people feel that they were always doing wrong, cause scruples of conscience in all their actions. It would weaken them, and that constant self-disapproval would breed more vice than any other weakness. Interesting, that if we think that we must not resist any evil, and if we do, then we are actually falling short, and this idea of this constant self-disapproval would be very harmful. And here he says it makes a remarkable statement. To the person who has begun to hate himself or herself, the gate to degeneration has been opened, and so with a nation. Our first duty is not to hate ourselves. Our first duty is not to hate ourselves, but to advance, we must have faith in ourselves first, and then in God. All right, well, this is a strong statement. We must not hate our first duty. Our very first duty is not to hate ourselves, says Swamiji. It's often difficult. We do there are certain aspects to our personality that probably we don't like, isn't it? For most of us, we do things and we think, why did I do that? How could I be so stupid? I'm worthless. What a stupid thing I did. We start berating ourselves. It's a habit. It's actually a bad habit, Swamiji would say, though that doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to improve ourselves, to give up. If we are doing things which are harmful for us, if they're doing things which are holding us back, then yes, we should strive to correct those things. But how do we do that? By self-hatred? By constantly criticizing ourselves? Actually, no. By having faith in ourselves. If we can have faith in ourselves, that faith itself will transform us, will bring us to purity, will bring us to proper action. So it's a beautiful teaching. To advance, we must have faith in ourselves first, and then in God. Well, how do we get that faith? Well, try. Start. You know, Holy Mother's final teaching, that was do not find fault with others, rather seek to find your own faults. Well, so Mother says we should find our own faults. But very gently. Notice them but have the faith that we can overcome those faults. If we are Mother's children, certainly she will help us overcome those faults. If we are Mother's children, then yes, we can see our defects and we let them go. That's the idea, is to become purer and purer by overcoming our defects, not by just criticizing ourselves and dragging ourselves down and pulling ourselves into a hole. That won't help anything. So we start with this faith in ourselves that, yes, I am a child of the divine, or the God dwells in me. I may not realize it, but so many people have told me, Swami told me so. Swami Vivekananda told me so. Sri Ramakrishna told me so. Divine Mother Ma Sarada told me so. The Bhagavad Gita tells me so. Well, let me take it as a working hypothesis then. Let's take it as a working hypothesis and try and see what happens if, yes, the divine is within me. I can do anything. At least I can begin to manifest that divinity. So we start with faith in ourselves, and that brings us gradually to faith in the divine, which ultimately is not different. Our true self is one with God. So one who has no faith in him or herself can never have faith in God. Therefore, the only alternative remains to us to recognize that duty, morality, and all these things vary under different circumstances. Not that the person who resists is doing something wrong, but that in the different circumstances in which someone is placed, it may become that person's duty to resist. Interesting, because this is the unedited class, we get sometimes a bunch of ideas thrown together. Are you having trouble hearing? Michael, can you hear okay? Shall I turn up the volume?
You're very clear, Swami.
Okay. Okay. Good. Thank you. I turned up the volume just a little. I turned up the volume a little for you. So he's weaving these different strands together. But this is almost like an aside here, and yet it's a very precious nugget, this faith in ourselves, that we really should never hate ourselves. And yes, it's difficult sometimes. I know when we do things and we have habits that we recognize are holding us back. And why can't we overcome them? We recognize that there's certain aspect of our personality that bugs us. And of course, it's also an interesting psychological law that the habits in other people that bug us often, or the personality characteristics that bug us in other people, often we have some aspect of that in our own personality also. That's a kind of a psychological law. So we can, and yet we're not to hate ourselves, but to have faith in ourselves, and through that faith transform, overcome those aspects of our own personalities which we don't like. And of course, remember that ultimately, our personality, including all its kinks and peculiarities and eccentricities, is not who we really are. Who we really are is consciousness, is spirit, one with God. So that is really where we are aiming ultimately. I am not this limited personality with all its defects. To a certain extent, we work on those defects. We work on those limitations in our personality. But ultimately, we let them go. We recognize that even that is not who I am. Even sattva is a robber. We go beyond. We have to go beyond even sattva, even the perfect personality, which is all peaceful and sweet and lovely and everything and nothing wrong with it at all. That's still going to keep us here. We go beyond. We go beyond even that personality. So we start with faith in ourselves. And then duty. Some of you have read, he's going to now give us an example as far as this duty of this idea of non-resistance versus resistance, the Bhagavad Gita. Some of you have read perhaps the Bhagavad Gita, and many of you in Western countries may have felt astonished at the first chapter when Krishna calls Arjuna a hypocrite and a coward because of his refusal to fight or offer resistance on account of his adversaries being his friends and relatives, on the plea that non-resistance was the highest ideal of love. We know, those of us who have studied the Gita know this is exactly what happened. So Arjuna goes on the battlefield and he says, oh, but the enemy, they're all my relatives. How can I kill them? True. How can you? It happened in this country too, in Civil War. Had families broken on different sides of the battlefield. This is the great lesson to learn, that in every case, the two extremes are alike. The extreme positive and the negative are always similar. The Arjuna seemingly demonstrating the highest ideal of non-resistance, and actually he's demonstrating a very low ideal of cowardliness, of tamas. The tamas posing as sattva, And we see it now and then. Dhamma supposing a sattva, someone who puts on airs of being the great, calm person, but actually is stuck in a very dark, lethargic state. So he says the extremes are alike. And Swamiji comes back to this often in different places. He says, we enter this world without teeth and crawling, and we go out without teeth and crawling. At the beginning, no teeth. At the end, no teeth. And nowadays, people who floss, they keep their teeth mostly. But otherwise, the teeth go eventually. When the vibrations of light are too slow, we do not see them. Nor do we see them when they are too rapid. It's recent science, no, of that time. The frequency of light, we get into the infrared, you can't see it. You can feel it, but you can't see it anymore. And if you get into just past the violet, you get into ultraviolet, you can't see it. The spectrum of light which is visible is actually a very narrow spectrum. So it looks the same. The ultraviolet light and the infrared light, they look the same, means you don't see them. You don't see them in either case. You don't see those wavelengths of light. And yet, they're very different indeed. The one will feel gentle heat, the other it'll burn the skin. So with sound, when very low we do not hear, when very high we do not hear. In like manner is the difference between resistance and non-resistance. One person does not resist because he or she is weak, lazy, and cannot, and not because he or she will not. The other is the person who, knowing that he or she can strike an irresistible blow if he likes, if she likes, not only does not strike, but blesses the enemies. Okay, he gives these two examples. One is not resisting because the person is too weak, doesn't have the strength to resist. That's why I'm not resisting, but weak. That's not real non-resistance. That's simply weakness. And Swamiji would say strength is the remedy. And the other has tremendous power, but doesn't. And in one of the beginners' classes, he gives the example of carriage hurtling down full speed down a hill with the horses galloping at full speed. And what happens? The thing overturns. And the other is the carriage with the horses tremendously restrained. Which is the greater manifestation of strength? It's that restraint. When there's strength, that's when restraint can happen. Resistance. So the saint not only doesn't strike a blow, but blesses his enemies or her enemies. The one who resists not from weakness commits a sin, and as such will not receive any benefit from this non-resistance. Okay, if we're claiming non-resistance, but we're saying it's non-resistance, but it's actually because we don't have the strength, we don't have the power, we don't have the courage, then actually he says of course, Vedanta doesn't accept the idea of sin in the sense that Christianity uses it. It's something which takes us away from God. It's something which hampers our spiritual progress. Error, not sin, but error. Vedanta doesn't really accept the idea of sin, but it accepts error. So here we say we make a mistake if we do this, while the other would commit a sin. He's using the sin language, but usually Swamiji would avoid that language. While the other would commit a sin by offering resistance. Buddha gave up his throne and renounced his position. That was true renunciation. But there cannot be any question of renunciation in the case of a beggar who has nothing to renounce. That's true. If someone has nothing to renounce, it occurs to me sometimes this man who we've been trying to help, this homeless man, some of you probably have seen him, had seen him before out here, and looking kind of like, in some sense, looking like an avadhuta, completely unmindful of the weather, unmindful of clothing, sometimes wearing just a a torn pair of trousers and nothing else, body completely filthy, no shoes, feet black like anything. And he's lying on the ground sleeping, completely unmindful of the surroundings. And in some ways you think, well, he's like some kind of wandering monk. He's completely unmindful of the climate, unmindful of anything. Is that genuine renunciation? He has nothing, but he's actually suffering from a mental illness, and he's probably needs some treatment and some medication, and then he can get a clear mind, and he can work, and he can begin to earn a living, and gradually he earns quite a lot of money. And then he hears the call of God, and he says, I don't want money, I want God. And he gives up the job, and he goes wandering in search of God. That's renunciation, not in his pathetic state, but I'm happy to report, although I'm still worried, but he was, through an agency, he was given housing. So he's currently, at least to my best of my knowledge and to my sincere hope, that he is remaining indoors. He was placed in a housing situation. So renunciation, we can't call ourselves renunciates if we don't have anything to give up. So we must always take care when we speak of this non-resistance and ideal love, what we really mean. We must first take care to understand whether we have the power of resistance or not. Then, having the power, if we renounce and do not resist, we are doing a grand act. But if we cannot resist, and at the same time try to deceive ourselves that we are actuated by motives of the highest love, we are doing the exact opposite. I think it's clear. We've been discussing this all along. So Arjuna became a coward at the sight of the mighty army arrayed against him. His love made him forget his duty towards his country and king. That is why Krishna told him that he was a hypocrite. Thou talkest like a wise man, but thy actions betray thee to be a coward. Therefore, stand up and fight. Such is the idea of the karma yogi, he says. Stand up and fight. This was one of Swamiji's favorite verses of the Gita, was this, give up this unmanliness and arise. Yours the scorch of your foes. What are you doing? Arise, have faith in yourself. Get up, stand up, be strong, manifest the strength, manifest the power within you. So that verse full of power. It does not, this unmanliness is worthless. It does not suit you. Such is the idea of the karma yogi. He or she is the person who understands that the highest ideal is non-resistance, but who also knows that it is the highest manifestation of power, and that what is called resisting evil is but a step on the way towards the manifestation of the highest power, which is non-resistance. Before having attained the highest ideal, the karma yogi's duty is to resist. Let him work, let her fight, let him strike straight from the shoulder. Then only when he or she has gained the power to resist, non-resistance will be a virtue. Oh, someone asked Swamiji, what should be our duty when we see the wicked oppress the weak? When we see the strong oppress the weak. And he's fired back. Why? Thrash the strong, of course. Thrash the wicked. Thrash them. When you see oppression, thrash the oppressor. That was Swamiji's general teaching. In another time, he said, what about non-resistance? When you see injustice, what about non-resistance? And he said, I am for non-resistance, for the sannyasin. For the householder, resist. This ideal of the Sri Ramakrishna also, of course, he has his story of the snake and the hissing. You know, I think most of you know the story of the cobra which terrorized the village and was in a field, and a holy man comes, and the boys caution him, "Oh, sir, don't go there. There's a snake. He'll bite you." And, "Don't worry, I know some mantras." And the holy man charms the snake and then gives him a mantra and teaches him not to harm, practice ahimsa. And so the snake stops harming, and then the boys beat it because they see that it's no longer going to attack them. And when the holy man comes back, he finds him the snake all injured and broken. And, "What happened to you?" "Oh, the boys, they injured me. They didn't know that I wasn't going to bite them anymore." And then the holy man scolds the snake. He said, "You fool, I told you not to bite anyone. I didn't tell you not to hiss." So sometimes we may have to hiss in life, but we shouldn't. Sri Ramakrishna says, yes, we have to hiss sometimes in life, but don't inject venom. And then he says, but the sannyasi need not even hiss. So that puts a big load on our head, we monks, and then we see how far from the ideal we still we still are when we see Sri Ramakrishna says, not even hiss. Well, that is a very high calling. So we've come to almost to the end of the hour. There's probably a nice place to stop. Have you got any comments or any questions or any reflections, any doubts, any objections?
There's always a doubt about whether you put a bullet in your cousin just because he's on the other side.
Yeah, you put a bullet in
I
it.
heard a story, I'm not sure, maybe I made it up, but I think I read recently, it was First World War or something, and the Germans and the Americans were all shooting at each other and whatnot. And then came a holiday.
Christmas.
So they put down the guns and they went and had a party,
Yeah.
drinking the beer and singing and whatnot.
Yes.
And had a nice time. The next day they went back to killing each other.
Yeah, yeah. I've read somewhere, some research, that a lot of the muskets that they found on the battlefield in the Civil War, on the battlefields, many of them weren't fired. That many did not actually shoot their cousins. And
I've often thought that it's kind of a daydream or something, that it's in battle, just shoot over there.
Shoot high, yeah. Shoot to miss.
I would with something that could kill her out of me, I might.
Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of people who crossed to the no man's land and escaped from when there was an Iron Curtain in Eastern Europe. The guards were commanded to shoot to kill if someone tries to escape. But many people managed to escape. Because the guards, they had good aim. They aimed just to miss.
Well, what about this business of, around my house, there's bugs that I kill them. And they're living conscious.
The bugs, yes, we have to send them to a higher life. That was the attitude of some of our earlier swamis. Yes, send them to a higher life. But Siddhama, are you doing it with vengeance and with a desire to harm them, or are you simply recognizing that these insects will destroy the house and they're going to disturb my meditation, and so I need to I send them to higher life while I eliminate them? Sri Rama, Balaram Bose was the great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna. He was a staunch Vaishnava, worshipper of Sri Krishna. And his family, they were all Vaishnavas, and he had that very strong ideal of vegetarianism and don't harm any living being, you can't kill any bugs, anything like that. Now he was, not termites, but mosquitoes. A Nag Mahashaya with the termites. That story is not coming to my mind right now. This is the that Balaram Bose. He was practicing meditation sincerely, and he was getting disturbed by mosquitoes. There'd be mosquitoes in the room, and so he wondered, would it be all right to kill the mosquitoes? They're disturbing my meditation, but it's wrong to kill anything. So he decided to go to Sri Ramakrishna to ask him for guidance because he had this doubt. And what happened? He arrived at Dakshineshwar and he found Sri Ramakrishna outside, shaking out a pillow and killing the bugs that were falling out of the pillow. He got his answer. He came to Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna said, see, these insects, they're disturbing me, so I'm killing them. And he had never seen Sri Ramakrishna do anything like that before. But on the day that he had this question, he came and he found Sri Ramakrishna doing this. Very interesting, very mysterious. So Sri Ramakrishna didn't have any trouble killing insects.
I have a stupid spider that lives in my kitchen. And he's not very bright. So he's always building his web in the wrong place. I said, well, the ants are over there.
Well, you could take your spider out and put it outside, or you could just observe it, enjoy its company.
With his cousins, they don't know what they're doing. I mean, it's not a proper web he makes either.
Might be he or she, yes.
I throw the ants into his web.
Oh, wow. to feed it, huh? Okay, give the spider some help. All right, well, shall we take just a couple of minutes of silence? We'll take a little silence and reflect. Hannah has a question.
When I was 16 in New York, someone was too close to me. Like, it was a large crowd, and someone was too close to me. I was uncomfortable, and I shouted at him. So that's like hissing, right? But I realized today that he was just Indian, and he had his hand on my back because he was probably a tourist. And like, that's how he moves through like packed crowds. And so, I was maligning him. I was like, oh, this man's touching me. But I feel like I run that risk a lot of like if I hiss at someone, if I assert my boundaries, then maybe that's a result of projecting some kind of wrongdoing on someone that might not be there. So how do we know that the wrongdoing that we see that we're hissing against is real?
How do we know that the wrongdoing we're hissing against is real? Well, the example that you gave, it was wrong. In America, it is wrong to do that. It's according to the custom of the country. You have to learn the customs of the country. So it's inappropriate and true. That's the further we go, the more sensitive we become, the more subtle distinctions we are able to make. And maybe now you wouldn't shout. Maybe you would turn around and gently ask him, please don't touch me. Who knows? But at the time, it was the hiss that came out of you. Yeah, we can reflect on that for a minute. what came to me is that how we hiss depends a lot on who we're hissing at, and in some cases, hissing is not the right thing to do. So Ramakrishna says, with a dog, you have to speak gently to it. If you hiss at it, it'll bite you. If you shout at it, it may bite you. And this person we were talking about, who was often sleeping out there, a perfect example. Once he came here with a bottle of liquor in his hand, and I scolded him. I said, "Hey, we don't do that here. You do that somewhere else." That night, he broke the holder to the brochure, our brochure holder. He smashed it into many smithereens. Then I learned, to him, you can't hiss like that. You have to speak gently. And he was very, very reasonable if you speak gently to him. But if you hiss at him, he'll hiss right back and he'll break something. so learned a lesson there. Well, thank you so much for coming and giving me the opportunity to delve into this fascinating class of Swami Vivekananda from December 13, 1895. And next week we'll have another one, because usually this Thursday night class alternates with Swami Brahmananda, who's studying the practice of the presence of God, Brother Lawrence. But he's gone to the East Coast, Washington, D.C. For their Labor Day retreat, so he won't be back till just after next week. So next week will be Karma Yoga again, and then there'll be 2 weeks of practice of the presence of God. So, good night. Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityor ma mritangamaya. Om shanti shanti shanti. From the unreal, lead us to the real. From darkness, lead us unto light. From death, lead us to immortality. Om, peace, peace.